Hello and welcome to Pockenrop. This is my YouTube channel where I talk about music, but today I'm not going to actually be focusing on the music. I'm going to be focusing on some album artwork. Specifically, I'm going to be ranking the Eddies from the Iron Maiden studio album covers. So if you're not aware, Eddie is an iconic character in British culture these days. He is a kind of zombie character that has appeared on all of Iron Maiden's album covers. But what I'm going to do today, there are so many different versions of Eddie on singles, albums, t-shirts, one-offs, that I'm just going to rank the 16 Eddies as we know them from their studio album covers. And coming in at number 16, because something has to come bottom, is the X Factor. I am not a fan of body horror. In fact, I don't like horror films per se. But the front cover of X Factor is particularly visceral. Eddie is a cartoon character. He's a cartoon villain. And when he's taken out of what looks like a painted or a drawn medium into what looks like it's like a waxwork, it doesn't work for me. I really don't like the X Factor album cover, and that it feels wrong as well for reasons that I'll kind of come to as we look through the Eddie of the 80s, where there's a kind of clear progression in the life after death of Eddie. And X Factor, I really dislike it. And for similar reasons, placed at number 15 is The Final Frontier. Now this at least is drawn artwork, or looks like it, but there's no real feeling that the malevolent character on the front cover of this album is actually Eddie. It looks like a space villain, and there's bits of flesh hanging out, and it's not a good Eddie. In my opinion. And then at number 14, I've placed the virtual reality Eddie from the Virtual 11 album. This at least is recognisably Eddie, but it's got an almost body horror grunge feel to the drawing style that has been used for the character. It doesn't help that the music contained within is probably their weakest album by some distance. But the nightmarish idea of Eddie reaching out from the dreams, unfortunately, is kind of done on something like Nightmare on Elm Street, which, by the way, the band have a slight link to because of the song Bring Your Daughter to the Slaughter. But Virtual 11's Eddie, I'm not that keen on him. And then bringing in number 13, we have the Eddie on the Dance of Death cover. Now this album cover is notoriously terrible. It is unquestionably their worst album cover. There is so much wrong with it. But the one thing they haven't got wrong is Eddie as Death. That works. But the problem with it, why it's so low down on this list, is it's not really that clear, particularly as we're in the CD age, that spectre on the front of it is Eddie. It could be anything. It's not clear that this is Eddie from Iron Maiden. And whilst he's perfectly well drawn, he's a bit generic. Likewise, the album cover you can just see here, Matter of Life and Death. Eddie isn't even prominent on this cover. He's riding the tank in the background, although his logo image with the guns is on the tank. But there's a load of reanimated skeletons that are walking. It's an anti-war album. It's an album about war and conflict. But that fella standing on the tank, who cares whether or not it's Eddie? It's that kind of questionable. And that brings us to ones where Eddie is the focus again, and actually it's distinctive. And at number 11, I've placed Fear of the Dark. So, and this one here, you can see Eddie he's part of a tree. Now that's a common nightmare trope, dating back to things like the film Wizard of Oz, where the trees come alive and attack. But in this one here, that attacking tree is Eddie, and there's claws and talons. Again, it's a little bit visceral when you look closely around the ribcage area, but that's unmistakably Eddie. It was the first Eddie that was designed by somebody other than Derek Riggs, who was the quintessential Eddie artist. And it's a good one, but it's not great. Now, number 10, I have placed an Eddie that was drawn by Derek Riggs, and it's the Eddie that we have bursting out of the grave and attacking the gravedigger in No Prayer for the Dying. Now, yet this album isn't good, but that is a quintessential picture of Eddie, and it's everything of the malevolence and the cartoonish violence that we associate with the character. It was a bit of a reboot, so Eddie went through a progression through the 7 1980s albums, which I will touch on when we get to it. And by the time of the Seventh Son of a Seventh Son album, there wasn't a lot of Eddie left. So they needed to reboot him, and it's clear that this is either an Eddie that's earlier in his timeline than those albums, because he hasn't got the bolt, the metal clothes on his skull, which we'll touch on later. And I think it reflected the fact that the band wanted to get back to basics a bit, and this is more of a straight driving rock album. It's still heavy metal, but the music isn't great. It was a bit of a misstep as a whole, but the Eddie on there is perfectly fine. Number 9, I have placed their most recent album, and that's Book of Souls. So as you can see, we've just got a head and shoulders picture of Eddie, totally dominating the cover. There is no question who it is. There is no question that this is an Iron Maiden album. And he's been adapted to the Mayan culture. There are lots of really good illustrations of this particular version of Eddie dotted around inside the triple album, and it just works. He looks like the Eddie we've come to know and love, and the plate on his head has been adapted into something that's got that Aztec Mayan style, and he's a really good character. Number 8, I have placed the Eddie that we find on the front cover of Brave New World. So this is it's similar in a way to the Virtual 11 in the fact that Eddie isn't physically there, but he's in the clouds surrounding this futuristic Londonscape where he's kind of scowling down, and you kind of get that feeling that malevolent influence that the character represents is hanging over London. And it was designed by Derek Riggs, and it was pretty much the last contribution that Derek Riggs made to the creation of his character Eddie. At number 7, I have placed one that might be a controversial placing, but it's the Eddie from Number of the Beast. This is before he started to go through the transformations that we'll talk about a little as we go through. There's nothing wrong with him. He's controlling the devil, who's controlling another little Eddie. But it's never been my favourite album cover. I've always been a bit uncomfortable about it. Eddie himself is drawn particularly well, but there is a glint of evil. There's something in those first 3 albums, we'll touch on the others later, where Eddie, as we know him from the first 3 albums, there's a fire in his eyes on this one, and there's that particular grin he's got looks really evil. So yeah, Number of the Beast Eddie. Following on from that and heading back a little bit, we've got Eddie the Murderer from the Killers album, which you can just see down here. So on this one again, you've got that angular grin, you've got a spark in his eyes. This is an evil Eddie that you wouldn't want to be meeting on the street, and clearly some poor soul on the front cover did, and hence we have the Eddie that we know from Killers. This is probably the one that is on more t-shirts than any of the others, and from what I understand, this was the original Eddie as Derek Riggs drew it before the band got involved and wanted the character. So this, from what I understand, is original Eddie. And at number 5, I've placed the Eddie that was launched to the world on their debut album on Iron Maiden. And I'd like to point out that the one that I've placed here is the very much the original, the punk Eddie with the shock of orange hair, not the relatively anodyne version that they put on the front cover of the CD that was reissued in 1998, where Eddie seems to have been stripped of his character by a redesigned, redrawn version by Derek Riggs. It doesn't have the same impact as the original 1980 version. So I've placed the 1980 version, not the 1998 one. And now we move into the top 4, where the story of Eddie really starts to kind of snowball and run as a narrative with their 4th album, and I've placed at number 4 the Peace of Mind Eddie. So, having been highly successful up to the point of the Flight of Icarus, and Eddie hasn't changed a huge amount. Maybe his hair colour's gone, maybe he's looked slightly differently, but on the Peace of Mind album cover, they gave him a lobotomy. They took his brain out, and that's where that plate on the front of his head comes from. It's bolting his head shut now that the brain's gone. And he's in a straight jacket on the front cover in a padded room, and he's kind of snarling and sneering at you, and this is the start of the transformation of Eddie. He's been completely shaven, his head is bald. Obviously I'm quite pro that look, and the Peace of Mind Eddie is, you just think if those chains broke and that brainless Eddie was to get out, he could be worse than the one from Killers. Then at number 3, I've placed the final of the 80s Eddies, which is from the Seventh Son of a Seventh Son album. There isn't a lot of him left. As you can see, he's just kind of a bit of a rib cage. He's got his shoulders, he's got his arms, he's holding a baby, and the top of his head has gone completely, although he's still got the bolt, and it's kind of like flame coming out of it, and you can see why they rebooted him for No Prayer for the Dying, because there wasn't a lot left to do with the remnant of Eddie in that narrative. Now, I love the Seventh Son of a Seventh Son album, and if you actually look into some of the more internal album pictures of that Eddie, there are times when he looks like a wise sage, and some of the threats gone from him, which is hardly surprising because there isn't much of him left. But I do quite like that particular version. It's a good piece of artwork. At number 2, I have placed my favourite Iron Maiden album cover, but obviously not my favourite version of Eddie, and that is Power Slave. So Eddie as a mummy or a deceased pharaoh. Again, you've got the bolt and the plate, so you can see that it's still the progression from Peace of Mind. He still hasn't got a brain, but there's something majestic about Eddie as the Pharaoh King. I mean, the whole album cover is beautifully detailed. It's just brilliant. But that particular version of Eddie, it's just great. So finally, at number 1, there is only one left. It can only be Cyborg Eddie from the Somewhere in Time album. What an album cover. There's so much detail in it. It could take you hours to pour through. But Eddie on the front cover there, on the front cover of Killers, he looks like a maniac. On the front cover of Somewhere in Time, where he has also just killed somebody by shooting them, there's a grim determination and resignation to his fate on the front cover of that album. He's been, obviously, cyborg implants. He gets his cyborg eye, which you'll see later on the Seventh Son of a Seventh Son album. He's been cybernetically enhanced, and it's just a fantastic representation. It's a whole brilliant piece of artwork, but the Eddie on the front cover of Somewhere in Time is, I think, the pinnacle of the art that we've seen on the Iron Maiden album covers. So that was a little bit different than what I'd normally do. Just talking about this cultural icon, Eddie the Head, from the Iron Maiden album covers. Thank you very much for watching. If you have enjoyed this, then please like and subscribe and click the bell for notifications. You may also be interested in the podcast that I make with my son, which is called Generation Mix, which you can get on Apple, and it's on Amazon Play, on Google Play, and please download it, increase our numbers. But until the next video, thanks very much for watching. Goodbye.